What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Extra Point College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Karnes, joined as always by my co-host, Daniel Hammock. Daniel, we have unfortunately concluded the regular season, which is the best part of college football. We're out of Rivalry Week, which is the best weekend of college football. We got to go to a rivalry game, the only downside being that it was a not neutral site rivalry game. In the clean old fashioned hate. There you go. The Gridiron, excuse me, the Invesco QQQ Atlanta Gridiron Classic. You know, some might say that was the greatest game in the history of the Invesco QQQ Atlanta Gridiron Classic, in the long and storied history of that game.
In many ways, it was the best game of the history and also the worst game, just as like it was a very low scoring Invesco QQQ Classic, but it was also the highest scoring one in history. So in the same way. So
some might say it was the lowest scoring game in the history of the Invesco QQQ Atlanta Gridiron Classic. You know, small tangent because this is our podcast and we can. Daniel, we learned a valuable lesson at the game on Friday, which is at a football game, you're not allowed to stand, according to the fans behind us. You know, opening
the nice young ladies behind us who are not wearing team gear for either Georgia or Georgia Tech,
but they were wearing team gear.
They were wearing random team gear and they were cheering for, I guess, the equivalent of the Napa Cap Shuffle, whatever they do for
they got
Georgia
loud
Tech
for that.
home games. That was their most excited moment, was when they saw a very special fan win.
I forgot about that.
I don't know, like a gift card to Kroger or something. I don't know what it was. Yeah, that was the loudest they were the whole game, other than asking us if we were going to be standing the whole game. So shout out to those young ladies and their moral superiority. We appreciate them, going the extra mile.
And to be completely clear, there were no kids behind us. There were no elderly people who could not stand.
Of course.
We were in a stadium full of people. And opening
many
kickoff,
others were standing while we were standing. It was not a.
Well, if you know if you've been to a football game, it's just I texted some people. I was like, I'm not crazy, right? I mean, like you and I have grown up Georgia fans. We were, I'm in Sanford Stadium a few weeks ago, and I kid you not, only time we sat down with TV timeouts, like the whole stadium stood. It's like center goes over the ball, and everybody just in unison stands because it's.
If Georgia's playing Charlotte, there's probably a bunch of kids. You're probably sitting down a decent amount. If you're playing an SEC football game, you're playing a big rivalry. I mean, you're standing. That's
opening series of the game. They're pinned inside the 10. I'm standing. We only get 12 of these Saturdays, Daniel, and I got to be present for one of them. I'm standing, dude. We've been looking forward to this for months of play. Anyway, just. It's our podcast, small tangent. Apparently, you're not allowed to stay. Our good friend of the show, David Cobb, was like, "Hey, there's one of the downsides of playing this game in an NFL stadium is you get those kind of fans, and that's probably true. You're in a actually not that comfy of a seatback seat, but maybe that's not an issue with some bleachers where everybody's wanting to stand.
That's true. Yeah, well, the wine and cheese crowd, and an NFL game. If you went to a Falcons game, it is appropriate to sit the whole game, maybe occasionally on a big third down and stand up. Yeah.
Not much to stand and cheer for.
Not much to stand and cheer for. And if you're not sitting in the swag surf section, which is the corner of the end zone, then you're probably not standing much of the game. So if maybe they were only used to that venue, I guess that's, whatever.
Maybe.
But
who knows?
Whatever. We still had a good time.
We had a great time. We got to see a rivalry game. We got to watch live college football, and for that, I will not complain. Daniel, on this episode, we're going to go through some coaching carousel. We've just about wrapped it up, minus a big one, which we'll talk about. The latest edition of the college football playoff rankings heading into conference championship weekend. 3 games we're watching, 3 uniform matchups we've got our eye on, 4 picks against the spread for our Power 4 conference championship games, and then some playoff prediction, which is getting easier. I think we've got, 1, maybe 2 spots to talk about that could become available. Let's start though, Daniel. Coaching carousel. I think the dust has all but settled on Lane Kiffin to LSU. On top of it being rivalry weekend, what a great like evening and morning to be just a college football fan on Twitter because
Right.
in on message boards, like because the rumors and the writing was kind of on the wall of Lane wants to leave. Obviously, he's already said it's down to Ole Miss and LSU. It's probably going to LSU. He's trying to work out if he's going to coach to the playoff. I really it's one of these things where I really do feel like I understand all sides and I can kind of be like, yeah, I get why you're mad. Yeah, I get why you're upset. Yes, I do think the system's the problem. Yes, I think all parties could have handled it better. Like I feel like I really do get all sides, and it's just kind of like it is what it is.
Yeah.
Sucks for the players, sucks for the fans, sucks for Lane. It kind of sucks for everybody. But what an entertaining weekend. We've got, Lane to LSU. Ole Miss hires Pete Golding very quickly. Let's just start there. Lane Kiffin to LSU. You and I both targeted him as what should be LSU's number one target. They get him. He in his press conference called LSU the best job in college football. He said, he kept mentioning that he talked to mentors, including Pete Carroll and Nick Saban. Then he made some comments about, I talked to some people and they called it the best job in college football. And I'm like, is that the same, is that Nick Saban who's saying that? Like he didn't say that, but kind of implied like, hey, Saban called this the best job in the sport. It is crazy on the surface to say you're leaving a team that went 11-1 and is in the college football playoff to build another team to do the same. But you and I have called LSU easily a top 3 job in the sport. We get it. And LSU got their guy. And then Ole Miss very quickly to retain Pete Golding. I think that's important for continuity, especially going into the playoff run, because the season's not over, which is crazy. They still have a national championship to play for this year. So they retain Golding, not even on an interim basis. They make him a full-time head coach, which I think is about as good of a hire as they could have made, and to do it as fast as they did it, I'll steal the Tom Fornelli. I think it's a great hire. I have no idea if it'll work out. That's kind of how I feel about them getting Pete Golding. But Daniel, this whole saga, your thoughts?
Yeah, retweet everything you just said. No, Lane Kiffin with, he was my number 2. I had Saban as number 1 for LSU.
That's right.
Of course, realistically, Lane was the number 1 option. He was number 1 choice. I think it's a no-brainer. Like, for Lane, it's like he has to go to LSU. That job's not going to keep opening up. And, it's one of these where it's time to go. Now, he just had to make a decision. Like, do I want to stay and be Ole Miss's greatest coach ever and just stay here and, win one if I win one? Or do I want to give myself the best chance to do it? Now, this could be a fly too close to the sun kind of a thing, because your lifespan at LSU will not last as long as it would at Ole Miss. At Ole Miss, you're going to have a lot of slack. LSU, if you have a couple of mediocre seasons, you're going to be gone. I had a friend who was a Tennessee fan talking about this. Of course, he's personally attached because of Lane Kiffin and everything. And he just posed the question. He said, what do you think would have happened had Lane just stayed at Tennessee? And my answer was really quick. I said, he would have coached for a few more years and he would have gotten fired at Tennessee. It's not about, Tennessee had a very high, before they went all the way into the dumps, they're coming off of Fulmer and everything like that. These jobs that have the national championship capability baked in, you've got a short leash. That's why the leash is longer at Ole Miss. They were just happy to make it. So, this is not a shot at Ole Miss. I think he possibly could have gotten them to a place to do it. It's just going to be so much easier to to acquire and retain talent, because LSU is about loyalty as far as the players are concerned. That whole state, you get, everybody in the state is moving in the same direction, even though the governor said something about incentives and the contract is mostly guaranteed. But all that being said, I agree with you with Ole Miss. To act as quickly as you did and decisively as you did with Pete Golding, I think that's the best of a bad situation.
Yes.
You're going to maybe keep most of the defensive staff. Did you have the best defense in the country? No. Is Pete Golding, someone that you're going to, probably get to brag about? Not necessarily, but he knows what's going on. He knows the current operation.
Yep.
And he knows the recruits that were already, on the board. He was in all those meetings. His knowledge alone will help the transition for whatever they do.
Right.
I do like that, Lane initially made that famous, hey, if you're not on the plane with me to LSU, you're not on the team. And Charlie Weiss Jr. went on the plane because he wants to be part of that LSU team with Lane.
Yeah.
But he has since been, approved by Lane and Ole Miss to come back and coach the offense.
Yep.
Thank goodness, because I didn't want to see, a coordinatorless offense, trying to do something in the playoffs. So I think best of bad situation could have been handled better. I think if you already didn't like Lane Kiffin, this was like you being able to jump on a table and scream he's still the worst. If you actually like Lane Kiffin, I think that you probably are like, oh, I get both sides. Me and you personally probably both like Lane Kiffin. If I'm an Ole Miss fan, I'm probably furious.
I get it.
Tennessee fans are probably still hurt, so they probably say their piece. LSU fans are probably pumped, so it's the SEC. It just means more. So this is people also don't think about Ole Miss and LSU being rivals, but this is also a huge rivalry. So I think there's a lot of hurt in that as well. It wasn't just leaving for another big job. It was leaving for one of your longest standing traditional rivals.
Yeah, no, I get all parties. Don't you love college football? Fans running them off the road. Marty Smith driving through the woods trying to get an interview.
The Marty Smith thing, man, that was just people. I love Twitter for a lot of reasons, but them being able to just keep up, like Marty, blink twice if you're in danger. Like what's happening? And he's just posted up at the Ole Miss athletic facilities. You knew that meeting wasn't going to happen expeditiously. They wanted this, they're going to negotiate throughout the day. They were going to see if they're even playing in the SEC championship. I think that's part of it. Having more time. Part of me thinks they would have let him coach the SEC championship, but not the playoff, just because of timing. So I don't know. There's a lot to it. And signing day is literally today while we're recording. So there's a lot of things to consider. What you don't want to be is without a coach on signing day, which we'll get to some teams that, or maybe one team that has managed to make that happen.
I want to go to a school that's not hired a head coach, because some breaking news here, Daniel. And this is on 3 Sports and not No 3 Sports. I did verify. I sent a funny tweet in the group chat earlier that it got me.
At Pete Nokos.
Top level Penn State donors are pushing for athletic director Pat Kraft to promote interim head coach Terry Smith. Pete Nakos reports.
Okay. Well, the players have famously been calling for that, but the players tend to always ask for the interim to be hired because players are easily influenced. But yeah, a lot of players really like him.
And that's why, look, he could be promoted, work out great. He could get promoted and be horrible. This is why players don't make these decisions. Yeah, it's to me, that's, you're hopefully hiring a head coach for longer than 3 years. So the current roster's buy-in, whom could transfer tomorrow if they want to, the entire roster, their opinion means very little to me. Unless you're in an Ole Miss situation where you have a championship to play for right now, that made a lot of sense, right? I mean, it's hard not to talk about this with him, with Terry Smith. He has made his love for and, admiration for Joe Paterno very publicly known. I don't know what role that plays in this process with the legacy of Joe Paterno and everything that went on with Joe Paterno. We won't get into all that, but that is part of this that I think would affect it will have an effect on his candidacy either way. But man, Penn State, I mean, I wrote down a list of like the coaching hires so far. I didn't even include like North Texas has hired their replacement. Florida, Auburn, Arkansas, Oklahoma State, USF, Kansas State have all hired a head coach. And Penn State sitting here, they swung and missed on, it sounds like, Matt Rule, Kurt Signetti, Clark Lee, Eli Drinkwitz. There's a lot of sitting head coaches Kalen DeBoer, that have signed extensions. Mm-hmm. And now they're sitting here. Today, who signed an extension today? This just happened.
Brent Key.
It wasn't Brent Key. Sorry. Give me a second. I just saw this. Jeff Brom. Jeff Brom to sign an extension. He's off the board.
Okay.
So, again, we said it when it happened. Is this going to be their Mark Richt or their Gus Malzahn? And I shouldn't have said that as a slight to Mark Richt, because it turns out there's not a lot of Mark Richts out there, and there's not a lot of James Franklins out there. And winning 10 games a year is very impressive. I get that you want to win a national championship if you're Penn State, and that this team came up short. I understand if you're Penn State in a natty year, you can't lose to winless UCLA. I understand all of that, but I think they have, found out, to use a meme, that it's hard to find a really good head coach. And look, I mean, James Franklin's got a top 22 signing class at Virginia Tech today after being on the job for like 9 days. A lot of Penn State flips in there too.
He just flipped 12 players.
And he has no staff. He was saying in an interview, people were like, Coach, who's going to be my OC? He's like, I don't know. Who's my tight ends coach? I don't know. You just got to trust me. And they're like, okay, sign me up. Penn State, I think, has one commit, one person signed so far. Their class is outside the top 100. This is a disaster at Penn State. And I'm not saying Penn State is not one of the top 20 best jobs in college football. How they have handled this situation is very much not how a job that's in the top 50. Penn State would say they're a top 10 job in the sport that expects to compete for national titles. They've not handled this job search that way. And a lot of good coaches have said no. So
yeah,
I'm very curious what Penn State does moving forward, because I think people forget, and it's easy to forget because it's been a long time, that James Franklin took them from the basement to winning 10 games a year as the state. He raised the floor of that program. He's a floor raiser. He's a winner. And I think we can see how quickly without that, how a lot of these jobs can quickly fall apart without the right person at the helm.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think coupled with the magnitude of today, seeing what James Franklin's currently doing at Virginia Tech, seeing what Penn State is not doing, I think makes me admire what Ole Miss did so quickly.
Right.
And that as soon as it happened, I was looking for the word interim when they said, oh, hey, Pete Golding's the guy. I was like, oh, okay, obviously he's like the only coordinator left on staff because they're taking the other guy. Of course, he's the interim. And I kept looking for the word interim, and I was like, oh, no, it's permanent head coach. And my first initial thought was, they didn't want to search. And then immediately I thought, no, look at the other ones that are going through searches. You've had on that same day 5 coaches officially announced in the SEC. So what are you doing? You want to have your guy, and you want to be able to start building towards whatever that next level is. Kind of going along with that, I mean, just, highlights today, we find out about Colin Klein. That was made known immediately as soon as they said that Chris Klieman was retiring. Klein, obvious next choice, is an alum, a big-time offensive coordinator, was a coordinator, obviously, there not long ago, quarterback previously. Brian Hartline, I think, was probably the most shocking, because I think Penn State fans probably thought that Hartline may have been in their back pocket. They were trying to get a big head coach first, and then he was going to be their coordinator that they chose. And Hartline goes down to USF, which I think, like you had mentioned, we talked about this previously, but hey, home run as far as for him to be able to go to a place that he can build and turn around, because you see Alex Golesh going to get Auburn already. Brian Hartline, he already recruits the state of Florida, phenomenally. And so he's going to do big things there, I think, kind of carry on what that tradition has already become at South Florida. So it is a little funny. Arkansas hiring Silverfield after losing to Memphis this year, and then Memphis kind of not so quietly talking about trying to get rid of him or potentially buy him out to just fire him. So they kind of Memphis did them a solid. We'll see how all this plays out, who's going to be right at the end of it all. Silverfield could end up being the right guy. Memphis has, had several good seasons over the course of, even I believe he was Mike Norvell's offensive coordinator, I believe, right?
I think so.
So yeah, he's been there for a long time. So anyways, a lot of coaching movement.
I was about to make a joke about, who Memphis should go and hire is maybe a head coach who's on the hot seat and has had success at the G5 level, experience in the state of Tennessee, like Mike Norvell. That's who they should go hire. Maybe all parties be really pleased. Florida State's like, yeah, you can just go take that job and take a new contract. And no, you don't have to buy us. You don't have to buy your own contract. That's okay. Well, we're good.
Yeah, we're good. We'll call it even. Yeah,
we'll call it even.
I thought you were about to say, apparently Coach Jerry Mack for Kennesaw State, which we'll talk about in a little bit, has Memphis ties. I think that's where he's originally from.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, please.
No.
We just got him. Like, let us have him for a couple years. I know that Kennesaw is going to be a stepstone. We're not going to be someone that can lock a coach down forever. but let us have a couple years with him.
I love it. Okay, one more. You and I mentioned, I forget where I had him on my board, but John Summerall to Florida. From what it sounds like, Auburn for weeks thought Summerall was a lock. When Lane officially passed on Florida, they turned their attention to Summerall and got him locked down. And I'm like, Daniel, did Florida just make a no nonsense, mature hire? Because you and I said on this podcast, we said Summerall should be like a top option for Florida.
Right.
But I don't think that people who care about winning the press conference are going to go get the G5 coach from the state of Louisiana, who was an assistant coach at SEC schools, no nonsense, hard nosed ball coach, because it's exactly what they just hired in Billy Napier. And by God, they went and did it. They went and did it. And I'm sitting here going like, man, they really, in a good way, they really chose to not care about the optics of it. And they went and got who they thought was the best fit to be head coach.
It's funny when you think about it, because the SEC is so incestual in the fact that they always hire from each other. And, trying to make this word work. But, all the Saban tree has always been, it was always famous to hire from that tree and everything. But also, I think from just a domino effect, LSU hired the coach Florida wanted. Florida, so LSU big boyed Florida, right? They also big boyed Ole Miss in that process. Okay, well, Florida big boyed Auburn, and they were like, we're going to take John Summerall. Well, then Auburn had to big boy somebody, so they big boyed Arkansas and took Golesh from Arkansas. And then Arkansas checks notes, big boyed Memphis. So they all had their own, but all of the, Alice Golesh was essentially announced the day before to go to Arkansas. And it just, Auburn was like, oh, okay, he's our plan B, pull that lever as soon as John Summerall told them no. So it was definitely like, who's the top of the food chain? And you kind of got to see how they all fell in line as far as which job is better than the other one. And it is how we ranked it as far as the SEC is concerned. We both were in agreement as far as that goes.
Yeah. So, I mean, coaching Carousel is fun. We'll do a full, breakdown in the off season as far as like grades. We'll break into that later. Just wanted to hit that though, as that came to fruition. Daniel, the latest edition of the college football playoff rankings came out, and it looks like, based on odds and where they had it. So one thing we needed to see was, where was Alabama going to be? I was of the belief, you're of the belief, like Bama, if they're in the SEC championship, they're not going to get left out, even if they lose. That was never going to happen. So, but the big thing there was they needed to be ahead of Notre Dame because of the way the numbers are going to work. They need to be ahead of Notre Dame this week because there's essentially one spot left. So, I mean, if you look at it, I'm looking at the top 25 here. You got Ohio State, Indiana, Georgia, Texas Tech, Oregon, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Alabama. I think are all locks to make it at this point in that order. That leaves in your 10 through 12, you're going to have two spots for two conference champions. And I'm not even going to say ACC champ and G6 champ, because we're just going to say two conference champions, because we'll get there.
Yep.
And then one at-large spot. And Daniel, we can save some of this for our prediction after we do game predictions. I don't want to spoil our picks here. I'm still baffled by Notre Dame and Miami. I will start there. Still baffled by it. I do think, I mean, again, we'll get to picks. If Texas Tech beats BYU the way they did the first time, I think there's a good chance at that point they flip the tech. I don't think Miami's done, is my point. I think they can still do the right thing, because I forget what the comment was exactly. The committee does whatever they want to every week. These rankings leading up to this don't actually matter. Right. They have said teams can sit still and move. So I think they made a comment about, like, if they're sitting next to each other, it's easier to consider head-to-head, which contradicts something they said previously, which is that if they're in the same pod, they'd consider head-to-head. They're in the same pod this week. Again, they don't know what they're doing. They do whatever they want. I don't think Miami's dead, is my point. I do think that Texas, Vanderbilt are dead. Which are those next two? They're not making the playoff. And basically Notre Dame's odds, though, match BYU's odds. They're opposites, right? So if BYU wins, they're going to get the auto bid for the Big 12. Texas Tech is a lock no matter the results of that game. If they lose, it opens up one more spot. Right now it's Notre Dame, but I just don't think Miami's dead. Any big takeaways from the rankings?
Yeah, I 100% agree. Alabama was the key as far as, finding out. I think Alabama is in with a win, obviously with a win or a loss. It just is going to determine on the seeding as far as what happens from that point on. Hunter, you're a check, Arkansas AD, who's thrust into the chair of this CFP committee. He's we haven't gotten a straight answer from anybody all year, and he keeps talking. They talk about how they're basically will completely re-rank everything after the playoff, or excuse me, the conference championship weekend. But Reese Davis was asking him, it's almost like it's just so obvious to everybody else, but not to them. He's like, so is there a chance that teams that don't play this weekend can move past other teams that also don't play this weekend? Which is the roundabout way of asking, can
Can
Miami
Miami
jump
jump Notre
Notre
Dame? Yeah.
Dame? And essentially, he's referencing that how stats can change based off of win percentages and, common opponents and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, dude, y'all are overthinking the whole point. It's like the whole point of the committee was to make it like a more blue collar, like the working man can be like, these are the best teams that should be in, the 12 best teams. And, everybody found their way to have little tie ins. But it's like, why are y'all trying to explain this like it's over our heads? The game was played on the field. If they have different records, I understand you saying, oh, well, actually 10-2 is better than 9-3, whatever, but they're both 10-2 with head to head. Like, it's baffling to me. We'll see what happens. BYU, to me, like you mentioned, is not safe. If they lose, especially if they get blown out, I think that it's actually very likely that they don't stay in the top 12. So, I think they're out.
Well, I mean, that's where the number's 10 at this point. You need to be in the top you need to be in the top 10 because there's going to be 2 spots for conference champs. So, like if you're in the top 10, you're somewhat safe. Notre Dame should be if the team beneath you didn't have a head-to-head win against you, Notre Dame would be safe, I think. But BYU being at 11, you got to win to get in. That's the one kind of bid stealer this weekend that you're going to keep your eye on. It's the one conference championship game where you could steal a bid. I'll say not the only conference championship game that'll have an impact in the playoff, but the one bid stealer game. So that'll be something to watch this weekend. Speaking of things we're going to watch this weekend, Daniel, we're picking our Power 4 conference championship games against the spread. What are 3 games we're not picking that we've got our eye on this weekend, as well as team of the week from rivalry week?
Yeah, so from rivalry week, I had my team of the week was Ohio State. Dude, they broke through. They took care of business on the road against Michigan. First time since 2020, since the pandemic. So that's impressive. I had them and Vanderbilt neck and neck for this champion of the week, but I felt like or team of the week. I don't think I've had Ohio State at all this year. And so I thought, you know what? Vanderbilt also big win on the road, blowout fashion, but I'll go Ohio State. So dominant win over their rival. And Jacob, there's something to be said about cementing that your rival is not making the playoff in addition to winning the rivalry game. So Ohio State dominating and stopping Michigan from they're going to enjoy the Cheez-It Bowl or wherever they go. They're not going to the playoff. So good on Ohio State, man. Beat your rival and do it in dominating fashion. So the 3 games I've got, of course, the Deep South's youngest rivalry, as you have coined.
We got to get that going. We got to get
Jacksonville
that going.
State versus Kennesaw State, which of course y'all see I'm repping the Owls here with the hat and then also shirt. Look, you don't want to go to war with the Owls.
With a cannon,
with a cannon that they shoot off during the game. Don't stand in the south end zone. It will rock your world. But yeah, dude, shout out Section 103. My guy sent me some stuff over there. Definitely appreciate him. He's got just a few things on there. He's got Georgia Tech. He's got Georgia Southern, LSU, amazingly so. And then also, the pride and joy, Kennesaw State. So yeah, that's a game I'm going to be watching. Jacksonville State, Kennesaw State.
Get you some 501. He's 501st, right? Or so, sorry, excuse me. We're going to cut that out. I don't even know what that was from.
Section 103. Look him up on Twitter
Yeah.
at Section 103. He's got some awesome gear. He just dropped recently. I think Kennesaw State just in the middle of the season, which is what caught my eye. When we went to the KSU game, everybody in the press box was wearing
immediately.
it.
Yeah, Section 103. Look, Lane Kiffin just hired at LSU. Good time to get some Section 103 gear. I might need to get some Section 103 Kennesaw State and LSU gear to wear in the pod. You know,
I think so.
My LSU fandom. So shout out to Section 103. I love the hat. As soon as you pointed it out, I was like, that's a sick hat. Dude. Best Kennesaw State hat I've seen. We are proudly a Kennesaw State podcast. So
yeah,
we
Kennesaw State did not have good stuff. You know, both you and I both went there. Their bookstore, terrible. I mean, I love KSU, but they haven't caught up. I actually messaged a friend that works in the athletic department to see if there's a way I can buy some gear off of them. And he was telling me how they'd actually barely got gear for their coaches, and
crazy.
Then Section 103 just pops up. So that was nice. It's not a paid anything. I just wanted to shout them out because they did send me some stuff. So, Jacksonville State, Kennesaw State, Conference USA Championship. Kennesaw State's favored, so 2.5-point favorite on the road at Jacksonville State, because Jacksonville State, of course, won that first game. Another one I'm going to watch, of course, Tulane and North Texas. That's a play-in for who's going to be in the playoff potentially. So that's a huge game. And I also like the JMU playing Troy, JMU playing for that shot, if there is one, for if the ACC champion is lower ranked. James Madison going for that. They're a 23.5-point favorite, so less drama in that game. Tulane, North Texas. North Texas is a 2.5-point favorite. For what it's worth, I have Kennesaw State winning. I also have JMU pulling out the dub and North Texas winning. That'll be important later when we're doing our college football playoff predictions.
Okay, the North Texas over Tulane. That will be important for later. Daniel, uniform matchup of the week for Rivalry Week. A lot of good uniforms. But I don't think there's anything better than USC versus UCLA this past week. Color on color is hard to beat. Iron Bowl almost got there. It looked really good under the lights there in Jordan-Hare Stadium. That was a great game to watch. Yeah, a lot of great Rivalry Weekend uniform matchups. That one was the best, though. All right, 3 more to watch this weekend. Number 1, I want to point out some that I don't think are going to be very good. Because of a lot of color-on-color matchups, right? North Texas and Tulane. Tulane needs to wear, like, blue everything. A lot of green there. You know what I mean? Different shades of green. Ohio State and Indiana. A lot of red. I am going to add this week the SEC Championship, just because it's a helmet game. Indiana might look better without the matte helmet, but, like, Georgia and Alabama, especially with Georgia wearing white, I think it's going to be a really good uniform matchup. We've seen this a lot in the last decade or so. So, great uniform matchup. Big 12 championship game. This one, obviously, you're going to have red and black against blue and white. A lot of contrast. BYU better be bringing their royal blues to that game. And Texas Tech better be wearing not whatever they wore against BYU last time. Those Patrick Mahomes uniforms, whatever it was, awful. Their normal stuff's very good. Yeah. Just wear your normal stuff. Lastly, Daniel, the Mountain West Championship game. Boise State's kind of owned their, like, modern look for a long time, and I feel like they've always fit with the times. Like, the one currently is very clean. And then UNLV. So you've got some blue and orange, hopefully a very, very blue uniform for Boise State, and then a very red uniform for UNLV. So that'll be really good in the Mountain West Championship game. Looking forward to the 3 of those. And we've got our 4 conference championship games on the season. Our picks against the spread. You're sitting at 47%. With a 4-0 week, you could get above 500. With a 4-0 week for me, I could get to like 44% on the season. That it's been a rough year for me. I'm 23-34 against the spread. 1-3 again last week. Daniel, I look back and I look at some of my picks, and I'm like, this is so wrong and arrogant. But I'm like, man, I'd pick a lot of these again. Like, the data's there. And then, dude, sometimes I'm looking at post-game win expectancy, and I'm like, I was even on the right side. This is my first year ever on the podcast having a losing season against the spread. So, yeah, ride with me again this week. to go 1-3. So we're really excited to go 1-3. Can't wait for it this week. So yeah, congrats on winning
I
the
feel
picks this
the
year.
most confident this week
I do too.
of all the weeks that I've had, and it's just like, it is what it is. This has just been a weird year. We're
Just
usually well above 500.
For what it's worth, I feel like I have to defend my honor. I'm making sure here on our we did some picks in the side with some friends, and is it over? Is it officially over?
I guess.
So no,
I don't know.
okay, so I won. There you go. I did win first place. So it's just against the spread that's killing me this year.
Yeah.
Hate to see it. So, all right, let's start with high noon Saturday. I do wish, Daniel, I wish the ACC would flex theirs to Friday night. It seems like of these games, that's the one that should be Friday night, if we're just being honest.
Because it's madness. Yeah. They should all have their own window.
They're doing they're like 23rd ranked team against an unranked team against the number 1 and 2 game, like head to head. It's just flexes to Friday. Anyway, high noon, the Big 12 championship game between Texas Tech and BYU. This is the biggest point spread of the day at 12.5 points. We saw how this game went down in Lubbock. It is sold out. They're going to break the Big 12 championship game attendance record. Good for them. They're in Jerry World.
That's awesome.
Texas Tech, a 12.5 point favorite. How do you feel about this game in Arlington?
Yeah, how many of those fans are BYU fans?
I don't know. It's a loyal fan base.
Because that's the thing. My first reaction was, oh, okay. I mean, Texas Tech, they've got a big alumni, of course, yada, yada, yada. But I feel like those BYU fans are going to be well-traveled. And, I think it's going to be pretty even the more I think about it. So
cool.
That's an exciting one, man. We're going to talk about 3 of these games being rematches. So it is what it is. But, I think that's probably why I feel confident, is because there's at least some data already showing what this game's about. But Texas Tech, man, they've been dominant all year, aside from their one little slip-up week. For the most part, I just feel like they are consistent. They're the model of consistency in that conference. And, I think BYU solidified themselves as number 2. I know that's like breaking news. The conference champion, I think they got it right. Texas Tech, I think, is just like a head above what BYU is. That's why this is a 12.5 point line. It's not a 6 point line or a 4 point line. It's 2 touchdowns. I like that both of these teams have, 1,000-yard backs. They're both balanced, but, through the air, they want to run the ball. I just think that it's going to be too much. You kind of take away any of the mystique of, playing on campus, since it's a conference championship game. So I think there's more room for just the best team's going to win. So give me Texas Tech. I think they're getting healthy at the right time. I think they're going to cover 12.5 points. I don't think that's too many for them. I could see this one being 17 to 20 point victory for them as they go down the stretch. BYU's, a much better team. I've been disrespecting BYU all year. It started out in the preseason where I thought that they were going to go under their win total. They have blown the lid off of that. They have made me look like a fool all year. This isn't personal. I just simply think Texas Tech is going to beat them and handle them. But yeah, no, they've definitely had a good season, but it ends here. And give me Texas Tech, the Red Raiders, lay the points.
Dude, and shout out to them and Crumble Cookies for keeping their head coach.
Dude, just for the memes alone, they have done so much for us the past 2 days. It's been awesome.
It has been awesome. Daniel, this game's very simple for me. Can BYU block Texas Tech? Because they couldn't the first time. And if they can't the first time, I don't know how they're going to score. And I'm with you on that. BYU, to me, they had their best 2 wins of the season, kind of the previous 2 weeks. Like beating TCU, beating Cincinnati. They played their best football. They're playing their best football. Can they reverse that from game 1? I don't think they can. Now, this is if BYU is going to win, it's a 12.5 point spread, right? So if BYU is going to win, how do they do it? They do rank 61st out of 68 in pace of play, which means they hold on to the football. And so I think to win this game, it's what they have to do. Is Texas Tech is the 8th fastest team in the country as far as pace of play goes. And so can BYU score touchdowns, have 8-9 minute long drives, and limit scoring where you get one stop And dude, it's late in the game and it's 24-21 and you've got the ball with like 8 minutes left to run the clock out. Like I think that's how BYU wins this game. I just don't think they can block Texas Tech well enough to do it. It turns out Texas Tech only needed 8 points to win the first game. I don't know how many they're going to need to win the second game. I do think they're going to cover in this one. And so I do think Texas Tech gets to that 30 number again. I don't know if BYU can get above 17. That gets me a cover. Give me Texas Tech to win and cover, knock BYU probably out of the playoff. I'm not blowing my prediction there. I think that's, again, they needed to be, they're winning in, losing out with where they are in the playoff right now. So,
yeah, same here.
Yeah. All right. Daniel, for the 8th time under Kirby Smart, and this is the second most played matchup in the SEC championship, we get Alabama and Georgia. And I saw someone tweet out a picture of Thanos with the quote of, you can run from it, but destiny arrives all the same. And in a crazy year in the SEC where Vanderbilt wins 10 games, the preseason number 1 wins 9, half the conference fires their head coach. We get to the end and we arrive at Alabama versus Georgia in Atlanta.
That's right.
For the SEC championship, as it should be. Daniel, anytime these two teams play, it gets me excited because these rosters are full of NFL talent. We're going to get a phenomenal football game at the highest level, indoors, unfortunately on turf in Atlanta. Kalen DeBoer, undefeated against Dan Lanning, Steve Sarkisian, and Kirby Smart. Georgia, under Kirby, 1-7 against Alabama. That one win in a national championship. They keep coming up short. I wanted to say it was a Nick Saban problem. It seems like Georgia has an Alabama problem. Do they?
Yeah.
Kirby Smart also undefeated in rematches. Georgia, a 2.5-point favorite. Who do you have as the winner of the SEC championship?
Man, this one, did you realize it's 10 out of the last 11? And I guess since they're playing each other, it'll be 11 out of the last 12. Isn't that crazy? Have been either Georgia or Alabama has won the SEC championship. It will be 11 out of the last 12. The only team not to do it is 2019 LSU. So,
and Georgia was really in that
remarkable.
game.
Georgia's playing that game. Their offense wasn't, but their defense, tried to be.
Attempted. They tried. I was at that game. 2019 LSU, special team.
That was a great team. And it takes a team like that to not be an inevitable matchup like this, Georgia and Alabama. Yeah, if there's one kryptonite for Georgia, it's Alabama. They see the script A on the other side. For whatever reason, they give up 13 of 19 on third down and, whatever it may be. No, Georgia, it's tough because we look back at that game earlier this year because obviously that's the most relevant to this game is the game played earlier this year. Georgia ran the ball really well. That was kind of the Chauncey Bowens coming out party. Everybody started to kind of realize what Georgia had in their backfield. Gunner didn't play poorly. I think that there's moments he could have stepped up more. Obviously, Georgia dropped a touchdown pass in that game. Taylor, who eventually got injured later on in that game, I believe. You've got a lot of different things that have happened. That was Jam Miller's first game back, and it looks like he might miss this game now after looking like he injured himself against Auburn. There's a lot to this. Alabama has not had a consistent running game all year. They've really relied on Ty Simpson. In some games, he looks like this, surgeon. In other games, he doesn't look bad, maybe just more meh, overall. For all the talk that Ryan Williams has gotten over the past year and a half and to being a cover athlete, Jeremy Bernard is their best offensive player, and he's able to just, make things happen in the run game and the pass game. He's explosive, 6 touchdowns on the year. On the flip side for Georgia, Zachariah Branch has just been everything and more for this offense. Georgia's actually kind of coming off of 2 of their most lackadaisical performances. After everybody and their brother was saying Georgia's peaking at the right time after the Texas win, it kind of went, okay, well, underwhelming victory against Charlotte, but okay, you can explain that away. And I kind of feel like people are explaining away Georgia versus Georgia Tech. So really, it comes down to nuts and bolts in this game. For me, can Alabama convert like they did on third down previously? Georgia's defense has quietly gotten a lot better over the course of the year. Can Georgia run the ball like they did against Alabama at the beginning of the year? What role does Gunnar Stockton play? What role does Ty Simpson play in this? Is this a Alabama problem? Is this, does Kirby get over the hump, so to speak? I think that Kirby is sitting in a place where He feels comfortable. And I think that this game's important to him. I could see Georgia, because it's a rematch, coming in and winning this game. I've got Georgia. It's a 2.5-point spread. So give me Georgia. I think running the ball is too much for Alabama over the course of this game. And I just kind of think things even out a little bit. All those third down conversions, I just think aren't going to be there for Alabama this time. And so if you're saying that Georgia's going to have a couple extra opportunities than they did previously, I think, running the ball, getting rid of some of that clock, and then, capitalizing once they're in the red zone. So give me the Dogs. I like them to win by 4. So it's 2.5-point spread. I've got the Dogs 24-20 in this game.
Yeah, Daniel, I look at this game, and in the first game, same thing with BYU Texas Tech. I think about how Alabama won, and it's the same way they won the last 2 years, which is, they outcoached Georgia for a half, like just blitz them. They took a 14-0 lead. In this one, they scored 24 first half points. And the second game, or in the game last year, they scored 30 first half points. They had a 28 first half points. They were a 28-0 lead in the first one before Georgia blinked and made adjustments. They've gotten out coached by Kellen DeBoer and his staff twice in this matchup. One of those in Athens. And I think another trend from last game was they go into Sanford Stadium and Georgia committed more penalties. I'm looking at this here. Georgia had 6 penalties for 68 yards. Bama had 4 for 16. That's huge to go on the road and do that. That's a disciplined team that we hadn't seen in week 1 to that point. When I picked Georgia in the first matchup, I said a key to the game would have been who can rush and stop the run. And Daniel, Georgia won that battle emphatically, and it did not matter. I also think if you're talking about a team that passes a lot, you're probably thinking not as much time of possession. Alabama held the ball for 35 minutes at Georgia's 24. I look at some of these matchups, Daniel, and I see when Georgia has the ball and is running it, I think they have an advantage. When Georgia has the ball and is passing it, at this point in the season, I also think they have an advantage, which I would not have said in this first matchup. Gunnar Stockton had 130 passing yards in the first game. I think he's going to have more in this game. I think him and these receivers are clicking at the right time now, despite the last 2 weeks. On the other side, when Alabama's passing the ball, I do think they have an advantage, and they showed that in the first game. When Alabama's running the ball, I think Georgia has an advantage for a defense that, stat-wise has not lived up to a Georgia defense as far as their own standard they set in 21 and 22. But one thing they've been good at all year is stopping the run, Daniel, and limiting explosive plays. And they were able to do that in this game. But then I look back, but despite all of that, first game, Alabama started off with 2 14-play touchdown drives to take a 14-0 lead. It was surgical. And for whatever reason, Georgia cannot get over this Alabama hump. I don't understand it. And the halftime adjustments, Daniel, they scored 24 first half points, and that was all they needed to win, as it turned out. They didn't score again in the second half. 24 is all they needed to win. I think they scored 24 again. I think Georgia scores 21 again. I think it's the same exact type of game. I think it's the same exact score. I think Alabama wins straight up. Both of these teams they are beat to death. They're injured. Like, they're both dealing with major injuries. To me, both of these teams need to win this game to get extra rest and get healthy to make a championship run. And I think, number one, I think both of these coaches have a good mindset. If they don't care about the whole, well, where does this put us? I think they want to win a conference championship. But deep down, they all understand that winning this game means you get some rest and you can get healthy for the playoff. And because I think both of these teams are in regardless. I think Alabama wins their 8th game against Kirby Smart in Georgia in this one in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Alabama undefeated against Georgia in SEC championship games and undefeated in the stadium against Georgia. I don't know why, Daniel, but when Georgia looks across the field and sees those numbers on the Crimson helmets, it just ends up being an Alabama win, unless it's a magical end of the 2021 season, which we got in Indianapolis. I bet Georgia wishes this game was in Indianapolis and not Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So
yeah, I think they were lobbying for that. So
yeah, they were trying to get the game moved. Yeah, I think Alabama has proven this year they don't need a running game to win. And I think that plays out of Georgia's style of how they'd like to win this game, which is by running the ball and stopping the run. It didn't matter in the first one. I don't think it matters in the second one. Give me Alabama to win straight up. Alabama plus 2.5 points. All right, let's go to Daniel. Is this the least talked about number 1 versus number 2 game since we've been covering college football?
It has to be.
It has to be. Which, again, this is what stinks is, and this is no fault of Ohio State or Indiana, This game has zero stakes. To me, if Georgia wins the SEC, they're the 2 seed, and the loser of this game is the 3 seed. If Alabama wins this game, I think the loser is the 2 seed, and the winner is the 1 seed. So you're basically playing of who's the number 1 seed and who's the number 2 or 3 seed in the playoff. That's what they're playing for. Again, I know these teams want to win, but at some point, if you realize you're going to lose the game, or if you realize you're getting a lead, do you call off the dogs in this game and say, we're not showing this team anything else because we may play them again? That's what I would do if I were a coach. So it stinks that, again, this is one of the consequences of an expanded playoff is you've taken meaning from a number 1 versus number 2 matchup, and you've put it on, like what was a game this past weekend that had stakes? I mean, you've put it on like a Texas A&M 9-3. You've put it like a 92 teams playing for a playoff spot. Instead of a 1-2 game. All that being said, I'm very excited to watch this game at night because Indiana is fascinating to me. This point spread is 4. I think if you just take away the logos and watch this team, you understand why it's 4. I think the Indiana logo, and for me too, I'm putting myself in this category. It is hard to look at Indiana, look at their roster makeup, and say that's a no doubt number 2 team in the country. Even though they've beaten Oregon on the road, they've gone, 23-1 the last 2 seasons under Curt Cignetti. He has set an unrealistic expectation for every other fan base hiring a head coach. But hey, Vegas, who makes money off the stuff, is saying 4 points. That's the difference in Ohio State and Indiana. Who do you like to win the Big Ten championship game?
Yeah, first I just mentioned you mentioning the importance of this game and how this is essentially just semantics. Who's gonna be seeded 1 versus 2 or 3, and I think that's how this game is thought. We just talked about the SEC championship, and I think you think about the SEC was the first ones to bring in a championship game. 1992 is when that started. Big Ten didn't start playing a championship game until 2011. So it's one of those things where, okay, it's another game that we play, but this is just something that we do. All the conference championships started to pop up, kind of around that time. Of course, the Big 12 was the last one to do it, and probably the one that needed to do it the most at the beginning of the playoff era. So I do think this one will have kind of a business-like approach where they'll pull their guys if it's not going their way. I also think if there's pride to be had, it's on the Indiana side. Curt Cignetti very much wants to prove himself in this game, but I'm getting the vibes, man, of 2022 Georgia for this Ohio State team as far as a back-to-back feel, where they're undefeated this year. Last year, they had to scratch and claw to break that ceiling, and it's almost like they're just, they're playing loose. And I think that an Ohio State team that's playing loose is very scary. Bo Jackson running the ball just short of 1,000 yards. J.J. Smith, what else can be said? I mean, physically the best receiver in the game, almost 1,000 yards now. And then Julian Sayin, who's been such a great, surprise, I guess, as a quarterback, 30 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. I mean, is it fair to say whoever wins this, like at the midfield, they give the conference championship out, and then they also just give the Heisman to whichever quarterback walks off the field as the winner? I think that Fernando Mendoza, he has far surpassed what the expectations were for him this year. I think he was thought to be a good transfer quarterback, but not necessarily great, and he's been great. And Curt Cignetti is, part of that. I think this kind of locks in Indiana to be a power going forward for them to do this 2 years in a row. And you can almost just circle that Oregon win as like this was the defining moment that everybody took them serious. All of that pomp and circumstance I just gave for, I think Ohio State's going to win. I think they're going to win by a touchdown. And it might be more. It might be more later, like you said, if they start to pull players or, if this kind of gets coached a certain kind of way. I just think Ohio State's better, and I think they're playing loose. And I think Indiana's best shot is not as good as Ohio State's best shot when it comes down to it. I think Ohio State's ceiling is higher than Indiana's. Just is what it is. They have more talent. It does not mean that Indiana cannot beat them. They're phenomenally coached. But again, Ohio State, they're playing with house money, and they just won a national championship, and they're undefeated. So they're on a high. They just beat their rival they haven't beaten forever. So I almost think that they're going to be a more dangerous team to play now because that's kind of been lingering over them. And now that the governor's off, they can just do whatever they want. They might rout Indiana. Who knows? But give me the Buckeyes by a touchdown and lay the points.
Yeah, I feel the same way you do. I mean, I'll be honest. I have a hard time looking at the Indiana logo and picking them to beat Ohio State. But beyond that, and beyond the roster makeup, I mean, what's Indiana's strength? I think they're a top 5 passing offense in the country. Well, they're going up against the best pass defense in the country, like number one. When they're on defense, look, it's a top 15 unit on defense. You're going up against probably the second best passing offense in the country. And Julian saying these receivers, I don't know if anybody can play man on them and win. I think they're just going to get theirs. Ohio State's starting to run the ball really, really well, especially with true freshman Bo Jackson. I think everything Indiana does well, Ohio State does a little bit better. And I think that's going to be the difference in this game. I think that's why the point spread is 4, is these are two very good teams. I think this game will be won at the line of scrimmage, as most football games are. And Ohio State has a better offensive and defensive line than Indiana does to match that. So I do think it's probably game script. I'm very curious because I would say I think this is a mid-scoring game that could go to high scoring, but it's two good defenses. And I'm just curious game script how it goes. I think this is like a 31-24 Ohio State win. I don't know if Indiana can stop them from getting 30. I think the Ohio State defense could limit the scoring a little bit more than that, but I will give some respect to Indiana and say they get to that 24 marker above. I think it's like a touchdown game. So give me the Buckeyes to win and cover in this 1-2 matchup, and they'll lock up the 1 seed in the playoff. Daniel, we go to the other nightcap game on PBS. We've got the AC. I'm just kidding. The ACC championship game. The Virginia Cavaliers, Tony Elliott, and Manny Diaz in the Wait a minute. This says Duke. So Manny Diaz made the ACC championship before Miami did. Interesting. Duke at 7-5 playing for the ACC title. Daniel, this game has major implications in the playoff because JMU is ranked and Duke is not. And both American Conference Championship participants are ranked. Duke is not. So if Duke wins, good chance ACC is getting left out of the playoff as things stand currently. Virginia, a 3.5-point favorite. Did the Cavs get it done and get their first playoff appearance ever before Miami does? Who gets it done on Saturday in the ACC championship game?
Yeah, man, this game is just so funny to me. Virginia just kind of been that team that everybody's like, oh yeah, they're in it, but they're not really. And they just kind of kept winning. And then Duke was always like that funny, the past 5 weeks, it's been like, oh, this would be really funny if Duke won and made it. And then somehow we're sitting here and Duke is sitting here with an opportunity. That is the most hilarious outcome, is Duke winning it and sending JMU plus whoever wins the American to the playoff. Again, we're talking about some rematches. This one was played a few weeks ago. Virginia handled Duke 34-17. It's very tough. It's only 2 weeks ago. If this was like beginning of the year, teams have changed since then. For me, it's like these teams are pretty similar to how they were just 2 weeks ago. It's tough for me to unsee that and to kind of reverse course. I think Duke has the better quarterback. I think Mensah, obviously you look at his stats for the year, 28 touchdowns, 4 picks, 3,500 yards just about through the air. I just think that Virginia is a better balanced team. I think they have a better defense. They've got a 1,000-yard back, Taylor has 14 touchdowns on the year running the ball. So I think they're going to be able to run the ball, take care, week to week. If you're a team that can run the ball well, that's going to translate week to week. And I think that's what Virginia does well. So I'm going to keep this one simple. Virginia wins. They cover. They make the playoff. You'll see that shortly when we do our quick playoff run through. Yeah, I think this Duke story is funny and all of that. I just don't think it's got enough legs. And Virginia's going to win in the most uninteresting fashion on Saturday night.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think Virginia wins. Look, I just needed to see them get over the Virginia Tech hump. We talked about only thing between them and an ACC championship berth was being the rival they'd only beaten twice this century. So It was an 8-point line. They beat them 27-7. We saw this game 3 weeks ago against Duke. Like you said, 34-17. That line was 4.5, right around where this one's shorter than that one was, and they beat them bad there at Duke as well. That was definitely Virginia's best game of the season, was at Duke, and that's because styles make fights. This is a Virginia offense that doesn't do anything particularly great, but it's a bad Duke defense. Opponent adjusted wise, they're the 63rd out of 68 Power 4 defenses in the country. Not great. This is a top 25 Virginia defense. So I think it's just a bad matchup for Duke. I think they can limit scoring in this game. And I mean, I think this can be like a 34 kind of 17 game, exactly like it was last time. I think the score could be exactly the same or around there. I think Virginia wins by a couple of possessions in this one. I think they get it done and stamp their ticket into the playoff. And what a season for the Cavs, honestly, to go to the playoff there. So, Daniel, let's hit our playoff predictions. Give me your 1 through 12. Who goes? This is kind of our last prediction before we have the actual final one here on Selection Sunday.
Yeah, we'll keep it simple. I mean, based on the results, mine's not too scandalous. Ohio State winning, so I have them number 1. I think undefeated Big Ten champ, that's easy. I have Georgia number 2 with a 1-loss SEC champ. I think that's easy. They're also avenging their only loss of the year in this game. I actually do have Texas Tech jumping Indiana, but it's because I do think that they're going to handle BYU, and the nature of the blowout win is going to push them up even further. Indiana, I think, is going to drop to 4, but they're still going to get their bye. I think that's how the committee is going to explain it. Like, hey, they're still one of the top 4 teams. So, they're not punished, but also Texas Tech has that conference championship, so they should be higher than them. 5, I've got Oregon. 6, I've got Ole Miss. 7, Texas A&M. 8, Oklahoma. 9, I've got Notre Dame. And then number 10, Alabama. So Alabama essentially drops 1 spot for losing to Georgia. And then 11, ACC champion Virginia. And 12, my American champion North Texas. And that's my 1 through 12.
Okay. So you get North Texas in there. All right, Daniel, mine, I've got Ohio State at 1, Indiana at 2. I don't think they move, given how the rest of my games play out. Alabama at 3. I do think if Alabama beats Georgia, they will jump up to the 3 spot. SEC champ, even with 2 losses. I mean, Georgia was the 2 seed last year with 2 losses. Different season, but I think 11-2 SEC champ Alabama gets ahead over Texas Tech, Big 12 champ, at 12-1. That's my 4 seed. 5 seed SEC runner-up Georgia. I don't think that Georgia will stay ahead of Texas Tech if they lose the game, but I'd be willing to hear an argument for it. Like, I think Georgia's resume would still be better, but I don't think I think the committee's going to reward, even though it's the Big 12, the conference champ. I would be curious though. You'd see how in the pocket the committee is, the Big 10, the SEC, if Alabama beats Georgia and Georgia stays in the top 4. That'll be interesting to watch there. But I think they fall to 5. 6, Oregon. These teams are all staying in order. 7, Ole Miss. 8, Oklahoma. 8, Texas A&M. 9, Oklahoma. 10, Miami. I think the committee's going to do it. I said I don't think they're dead. I think if BYU gets blown out, which I think they will, given my prediction, and then it's 10 Notre Dame, 11 Miami, I don't know how they're going to look at the camera with a straight face and say they were comparable enough to be 10 and 11, and we didn't consider head-to-head. I think at that point, because, look, these are humans that are not following, they followed a formula, but, I don't think they're going to be able to face the media and look at them right there and say the resumes are comparable, head-to-head, just one of the things. If they're 10 and 11, I think that Miami's going to jump Notre Dame at that point. That's what I would do. That's the right thing to do. I think they're going to do it.
They should. I hope you're right.
I hope I'm right too.
Because I think they're not going to do it just because.
Well, this is why I do think, unfortunately, I think the Big 12 championship matters for this, because if BYU loses in overtime, I think they can say, you know what, we're keeping BYU at 11, so they're still out of the playoff, but then they don't have to compare Miami and Notre Dame head-to-head. I think if they get blown out in Miami, unfortunately, I think that matters. It's dumb, but I think it matters. Okay, so Miami at 10, that's my big surprise. UVA at 11, Tulane at 12 out of the American. I'm rolling with your preseason American pick.
If you want to know my reasoning, both coaches, of course, Eric Morris going to Oklahoma State, John Summerall going to Florida. I think they're both going to have that like split, paying attention to both things going on at once. But I also think John Summerall's got way more to pay attention to at Florida. So I think it's a little bit more of a distraction. So I am leaning North Texas for that reason. Also, North Texas had a great year, so they've been a phenomenal team. So, but yeah, it did kind of feel weird riding with Tulane this whole way and then changing up here at the last moment, but that's what we're doing.
I'm just kidding. All right, Daniel, this is our last podcast before Selection Sunday. We'll be back next week to react to the playoff rankings, have some playoff, pick our national champion before the games start. That's the fun way to do it, right? And then we'll start picking games after that to finish out the season. Daniel, what a regular season it's been. It's been a really fun podcast year here for us, but I sent y'all some stats that we'll post later. But thank you so much for watching and listening to the Extra Point Podcast. We're super grateful to do this. It's super fun for us, and we are honored and humbled that people would want to listen to us talk about football. So you and I would do this whether we were recording or not. So it's fun that we can hit record and put it out there for people to enjoy. So thank you all for watching and listening to the podcast. Be sure to follow the podcast at the Extra Point Pod on Instagram and YouTube, because I know the season's wrapping up, but we've got so much coming the end of the season and next year that we're excited about. So you're not going to want to miss out at the Extra Point Pod on YouTube and Instagram. You can follow Daniel on Twitter at Deep South Daniel. You can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Karnes with a K. That'll do it for this edition of the Extra Point. He is Daniel. I am Jacob. See ya.